what's up? It's your boy Rawk. What defines a hobby to you? Something that relaxes you? Something that makes you feel happy? Yeah, that's nice. But it's also wrong. A perfect hobby to me is something that makes me miserable. Something that causes me to suffer. Which is why I now play Super Mario Galaxy 2 like this. Oh god! Oh f***! Where is that goddamn green star?! You know, masochism would probably suffice. Man, this game is so nice and easy. What? Video game difficulty is something of a contentious topic, and has been for almost as long as those three words were allowed to be said together. Imagine showing this to a Roman centurion. What did you expect to happen? Video games in the arcade were designed to be difficult. That way you'd be killed off before you got to experience a good chunk of what the game offered. Which would lead to you paying to play again and again and again. Which is also why the concept of lives exists in games. We're gonna spit in your mouth and your wife, and you're gonna pay us to do it again. This level of difficulty somewhat made the transition to home consoles, most notably with some early NES titles. Games on Atari were definitely labelled as difficult, such as E.T. the video game, but a lot of that probably came from people not knowing what the f*** they were supposed to do. Due to the sheer lack of file sizes for old 8-bit games, they never really had much content to them. So what better way to get players to spend more time on your game than by making them actively hate it? As time went on, people became a lot more competent when it came to games, so higher difficulty stuff began to feel like less and less of an issue. But at the same time, video games were starting to appeal to more and more people. Younger audiences actively started playing video games, and as such, the ridiculously difficult standards set by a lot of the biggest series had to change. You can't expect little Timmy to get through Dark Souls. He can't even tie his fucking shoelaces. I mean, I don't really see how that's relevant. Instances of a game's difficulty being deemed too high for general audiences can be seen as far back as Super Mario Bros. 2 on the NES. The original version of Super Mario Bros. 2, which later came to be known as the Lost Levels, never made its way outside of Japan initially, as the game was deemed to be too difficult for American audiences. Now that didn't mean that hard games just stopped existing, but it did begin to lead to an interesting phenomenon where a lot of series had to pick a lane. Were they gonna be easy or difficult? For example, the Mario series definitely leaned into the former category. Mario 3 and World had some trickier parts to them, Mario 64 was a cakewalk until you unlocked the upper floor of the castle, and Super Mario Sunshine made people piss themselves, and not just because of all the water. But when 2D Mario was revived with New Super Mario Bros. And the 3D games took the leap to the Wii with Super Mario Galaxy, it became obvious that they were designed to be a lot less challenging than the games that came before them. In this instance, that makes total sense. Mario is Nintendo's #1 cash cow, so they definitely don't want to limit the appeal of this series by making the games too difficult. Even if that did leave some longtime fans of the series out in the cold, keeping the demographic for the series as wide as possible was worth it in the long run. Now obviously, there is some nuance to this. Not every game in any series would fit neatly into either category. Pikmin 1 and 2, for example, could be pretty brutal, but 3 and 4 definitely dialed that back a bit. But on the whole, series wouldn't really see a great deal of fluctuation between the two extremes. Now, a lot of people whose lives peaked in the 90s would argue that games nowadays are too easy. The youths of today are f***ed because they just don't make Sonic games like they used to. They used to be bad, damn it! But if you ask me, having a diversity of levels of difficulty across all different games, series, and systems is only a good thing. It allows people who want more of a challenge to be just as satisfied as people who just want something easy to play. It's definitely true that there can sometimes be more of one type of game than another, but on the whole, this was a good way for gaming to go. And the reviewers did not agree. And if IGN says something is bad,
it probably doesn't mean all that much.
Has anyone else noticed how weird game reviewers can be when it comes to difficulty? I know for big gaming publications, it's always somebody different writing each review, which obviously means there are a lot of different tastes and preferences at play. But even with that in mind, I find it fascinating how all over the place the reception of difficulty in games can be. Let me explain what I'm talking about here. I've noticed that some games will get criticized for being too easy, while in the same breath, other games will get criticized for being too hard. But also, similar games will be praised for their higher difficulty, and others praised for their lower difficulty. Do I sound like I've gone mad? Because I probably have. I see this a lot with Kirby games. Every single time one comes out, the reviews always say, yeah, it's a good game, but it's far too easy. And it's like, guys, that's kind of the point. The entire design philosophy behind the Kirby series is that it's easy for anyone to pick up, play, and have a good time with. But for those who go searching for it, there's also a lot of depth and challenge on offer. So like, yeah, of course if you're just playing through the game for the sake of a review, it's gonna be easy. That's the point. I'm not saying it's not legitimate criticism. If somebody's enjoyment of a game was hindered by it being too easy, that's perfectly valid. But then Cuphead got criticized for being too difficult, some reviewers going as far as saying that the tutorial was too difficult for them, which, first of all, it's a tutorial, what are you doing? And second of all, guys, that's the point of the game. It's supposed to be difficult. But then, there's games like Dark Souls, where the whole allure of the game is its ludicrous difficulty, and that gets praised for being as difficult as it is. Guys! And then Pikmin 3 gets praised in reviews for it being an easy game. Guys! I get it. It's all about the context. The game's genre, the games that came before it, and that specific reviewer's tastes and preferences. I just find it interesting how nobody can seem to agree on whether high or low difficulty is preferred. Metroid Dread and Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze are good examples of this, as they somewhat sit in the middle of these extremes. They are definitely difficult games, and people either praise them because of it, or hate them because of it. So, what are the benefits of making an easy game, or a hard game? What would society stand to gain from that? Well, a difficult game can be seen as much more stimulating, as a higher level of challenge requires you to really engage with the game's mechanics and think critically about how best to tackle a challenge. So to some people, harder games are more interesting. There's also a satisfaction that comes from having an immediate and obvious metric to judge how much you've improved. A tricky sequence can kick your ass the first couple of times, and being able to improve to such a degree that you can overcome that makes you feel like a goddamn champion, which I feel is a big part of the appeal of more difficult games. The sense of pride and exhilaration that overcoming the challenges affords is really appealing. Easier games, on the other hand, offer a completely different experience. Their low level of challenge can allow a game to be a lot more relaxing, which, if you're anything like me, significantly heightens immersion. The lack of grueling sequences and the repetition that stems from redoing them over and over again can simply make easier games more enjoyable. Even if there is an eventual satisfaction that comes from completing a segment of that nature, there's definitely an argument to be made that easier games have a higher percentage of enjoyability over their playtime. For me personally, I tend to prefer an easier game, which is probably why I'm so fond of the new Super Mario Bros. Series. That doesn't mean to say that I dislike hard games though, as the games I just mentioned, Metroid Dread and Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, are some of my favorite games ever. But if a game is too difficult for me, then I'll definitely look on it less favorably than a game that I found to have a consistently nicer difficulty. Which just means I'm part of the problem.
Ugh, this topic hurts my brain. Video game difficulty is all over the place, as is the general reception to difficulty in gaming. And while I want the reception of different levels of difficulty to be consistent, my own reception of it is inconsistent, so how can I possibly expect that to happen? With so many different tastes and preferences with how we like to experience our games, how can we possibly hope to have a game with the perfect level of difficulty for us? By doing it ourselves.
Difficulty options. What some may call the lazy way out for a developer that doesn't want to balance difficulty themselves, I call the Holy Grail. Video games that have difficulty options? They're marriage material, that's all I'm gonna say. The perfect way to satisfy any and all players when it comes to a game's difficulty is to let them select that difficulty themselves. It's perfect! These options haven't always been around, but they're thankfully starting to be a bit more commonplace nowadays. And they can take many different forms. In some cases, it's an alternative playable character who has attributes unique to them that makes the overall game experience easier. For example, Funky Kong or Toadette in the Switch ports of Tropical Freeze and Mario U. They could come in the form of an easier or harder mode, such as Master Mode in a lot of Zelda games. Or, in the best case scenario, they come in the form of straight up difficulty settings, allowing you to choose what level you play the game at. Bonus points if you're able to change it midway through the game. The way games handle this can be wildly different, whether it be that you take more or less damage depending on your difficulty, enemies taking more or less damage, enemy placement and number being altered. There are lots of ways that games can be customized to fit your tastes. This isn't a perfect fix in some cases. Games with higher difficulty modes can still be too easy, and vice versa, but even if they aren't always perfect, why isn't this standard practice? I personally think that every single game should have difficulty options, as they're nothing but a good thing for the player. Even if a game is designed to be harder or easier, is sticking by that so rigidly really worth it if you're going to be alienating a potentially significant number of people who may be interested in playing? From the player's point of view, this just gives us the freedom to enjoy so many more games, by making it so we don't have to struggle the whole time we're playing, or find ourselves breezing through with little to no actual effort. And even beyond preference, this also massively benefits accessibility. A lot of players simply can't play games that are too difficult, so having difficulty options simply means that they're still able to experience and enjoy these games that they might not have been able to otherwise. While having different games offer different difficulties from each other can make sure everybody has a game they can enjoy, one game having different difficulties means that everybody can enjoy that game. And in my eyes, that's what the industry at large should be striving for.
Video game difficulty is important. It may seem trivial on the surface, but it massively impacts how we experience the games we play. And being able to customize how difficult those games are just means that we all get to enjoy them all the more. So, the next time I'm playing Super Mario Galaxy 2, there'll be only one thing on my mind.
It could have done with an easy mode.